The receipt slid across the white tablecloth like a quiet verdict, and in that moment the billionaire felt his chest tighten as if the room itself had leaned in to watch him fail. Sunlight poured through the restaurant's tall glass windows, catching dust motes in its glow, but all he could see was the number at the bottom of the paper and the tremor in his own hand as he reached for a pen that suddenly felt heavier than any contract he had ever signed. Before the story deepens, a quick pause from Kind Soul Narratives. If you believe in hope, compassion, and second chances, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to support stories that remind us we're all human beneath the surface. His name was Armen Keter, a man whose face had appeared on magazine covers beneath headlines about disruptive innovation and overnight success. At 42, he wore his wealth the way others wore armor: tailored navy suit, understated watch, posture trained to never bend. Yet this afternoon, seated alone at a corner table during the lunch rush, the armor cracked. The restaurant was elegant but warm, filled with daylight reflecting off polished cutlery and soft beige walls. Conversations hummed around him, a normal world continuing as if his own had not begun to tilt. Armen had just signed documents that morning authorizing the sale of his last remaining liquid asset to cover debts he had hidden for months. The joke he planned was meant to lighten the suffocating pressure inside him, something flippant to remind himself that he still controlled the narrative of his life. The waitress who approached his table did not look like someone who belonged in his world, and that was exactly why he chose her for the joke. Her name tag read, Syra. She was in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back neatly and faint shadows beneath eyes that had learned to wake before dawn. She moved with practiced efficiency, balancing plates, refilling glasses, navigating the narrow spaces between tables like a dancer who knew every step by heart. There was nothing extraordinary about her presence at first glance, yet something in the way she held herself hinted at a deeper story, one carved by long hours and quiet endurance. Armen watched her as she set down his water, the clink of glass echoing softly. The restaurant smelled of fresh bread and citrus polish, and sunlight warmed the back of his neck. Without looking up from the receipt, he made the offhand remark, asking her what she thought a man should do when his finances were falling apart, framing it with the easy arrogance of someone who had always believed failure was an abstract concept. It was meant to amuse him, maybe even make her laugh nervously before she excused herself. Instead, Syra froze, just for a breath, and when she spoke her first words, they were not what he expected. She did not laugh or deflect. Her expression shifted, eyes focusing on him with a seriousness that felt like a spotlight. She told him that the first thing to do was stop pretending the fall was a joke, because denial was the most expensive habit a person could afford. Those words landed heavier than any accusation. Armen looked up sharply, meeting her gaze for the first time. In her eyes, he saw something painfully familiar, exhaustion layered over determination, the look of someone who had already survived the collapse he feared. The rest of the restaurant blurred into soft shapes and sound. Armen felt a rush of heat in his face, not from embarrassment but from recognition. His mind flashed back to his childhood, to the cramped apartment where he grew up watching his father count coins on the kitchen table, promising that one day they would never worry about money again. Armen had built his empire on that promise, driven by a terror of scarcity so deep he never noticed when ambition turned into obsession. Now, seated across from a woman who earned her living on her feet, he felt stripped of the illusions that had protected him. Syra did not know his name or his net worth, and that was precisely why her words cut through him. She spoke of financial advice not as theory but as lived experience, explaining that stability was not about numbers but about honesty with oneself. She described losing her mother to illness while still in university, dropping out to support her younger brother, and learning the hard way that survival required clarity, not pride. Armen listened, stunned by how naturally she articulated truths he had avoided for years. The daylight streaming through the windows illuminated the faint scar on her wrist, a silent testament to past struggles she carried without display. As the minutes passed, Armen felt something inside him unravel. The joke he had planned dissolved, replaced by a raw vulnerability he had not allowed himself since his father's funeral. He realized how alone he had been at the top, surrounded by advisors who spoke in projections and percentages but never asked how he slept at night. Cyrus' presence grounded him in a reality where money was a tool, not an identity. The clatter of dishes and low murmur of conversations became a comforting backdrop, a reminder that life continued even when empires trembled. He found himself opening up, not in dramatic confession but in small admissions of fear and regret, the way a dam leaks before it breaks. Syra listened without judgment, her empathy steady and unforced. She suggested practical steps rooted in humility, facing creditors honestly, cutting losses, redefining success beyond public perception. Each idea felt both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, Armin considered that losing his wealth might not mean losing himself. The afternoon wore on, sunlight shifting across the floor as clouds passed outside. Armin noticed details he would have once ignored, the way a child laughed at a nearby table, the scent of coffee rising from a fresh pour, the warmth of the chair beneath him. These ordinary moments felt precious, as if his senses had awakened from a long sleep. He thought about how many lunches he had spent in boardrooms, chasing deals that left him emptier than before. Here, in a quiet restaurant, he felt more present than he had in years. Syra eventually excused herself to attend to other tables, leaving Armin alone with his thoughts and the receipt that no longer felt like a verdict but a starting point. He paid, leaving a generous tip not out of obligation but gratitude. As he stood to leave, the weight in his chest had shifted. The fear remained, but it no longer paralyzed him. He stepped out into the bright afternoon, the city alive with motion, and for the first time in months, he walked without rehearsing excuses for his own failure. In the days that followed, Armin made choices that surprised even himself. He downsized his lifestyle, met with creditors transparently, and began untangling the web of decisions that had led him to the brink. The process was painful and humbling, yet each honest step felt like reclaiming a piece of his integrity. He thought often of the waitress whose first words had shattered his denial, wondering how many lives were quietly held together by people the world overlooked. Weeks later, Armin returned to the restaurant, not as a man seeking distraction but as someone seeking connection. The daylight was just as warm, the atmosphere unchanged, yet he felt different within it. When he saw Syra, he felt a quiet surge of gratitude. He did not need to announce who he was or what he had lost. It was enough to acknowledge the moment they shared, a turning point forged in unexpected honesty. If this story has begun to move you, Kind Soul Narratives invites you to support it by liking, sharing, and subscribing, so more stories of quiet courage and unexpected kindness can reach hearts that need them. Before the final moments unfold, take a second to comment what part of this journey resonated with you most, because your words help keep stories like this alive. In the end, Armin understood that wealth could vanish, titles could fade, but the capacity to listen and change was a fortune no market could crash. The memory of that sunlit afternoon stayed with him as a reminder that wisdom often arrives in unassuming forms, and that sometimes the most life-altering advice comes from those who have learned to survive without applause. As he stepped back into the world, lighter not because he had regained riches but because he had regained himself, the story closed not on loss but on renewal, leaving the audience with the quiet assurance that even at the edge of ruin, compassion can open a door to a future worth walking into.